Want to know how Canada's top industry leaders feel about creating significant wealth in the world around them? Find out with me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at Canaccord Genuity, and host of the new Smart Wealth podcast, available on iHeart or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe now. Hello, I'm Thane Stenner, host of the BNN Bloomberg brand studio Smart Wealth podcast, which runs monthly. This is where I get to interview some pioneers from various industries, backgrounds, with some amazing stories. These people that I get to interview also have some lessons learned along the way in their profession and in their journey. And they share tips that are really insightful. So, it's a real honor and a real pleasure for me to be able to interview the guests that I do. My goal with the Smart Wealth podcast is to have authentic personal conversations with some amazing people who have already accomplished much in their careers and lifespans, but still have a lot more to accomplish still. My special guest today is Dr. Sharilyn Hale, who's the president and founder of Watermark Philanthropic Council. So Sharilyn, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, very happy to have you. And I think we're going to really try to have a conversation that brings to life the issues around philanthropy, charity, and generosity. So before we jump in with some questions, I want to give some background or bio of Sharilyn. She works with some of the leading philanthropic families in Canada and the Caribbean, and various social purpose organizations across Canada as well. She's an advisor with the 21-64 group to support the multi-generational family philanthropic process, and as a faculty member of the US-based Ultra High Net Worth Institute. She also holds the Master of Financial Advisor in Philanthropy, which is a very specialized designation, as you can probably guess, and as a member of the Canadian Association of Gift Planners. As a chartered director, Sharilyn is also a certified governance advisor and trainer with BoardSource, which is blending the corporate and family governance in her work with foundations and nonprofit boards. She's also an invited speaker, an author, and known for her incredible ability to combine on-the-ground practical experience with the best of the philanthropic theory and research field today. Sharilyn's award-winning doctoral research on family philanthropy governance in Canada produced a model that today helps families approach their giving in a meaningful way that really works. She recently completed a study exploring affluent philanthropy in the Caribbean, where she grew up and continues to also work. She's a committed volunteer. Sharilyn is a member of the Advisory Council for Canada's first graduate degree program in philanthropy and nonprofit leadership at the Carleton University, and is a vice chair of the Toronto Public Library Foundation in support of the world's busiest library system. So Sharilyn, right out of the gate, again, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here. And I guess my first semi-quick question is, I did not know that the Toronto Public Library was basically the busiest library system in the world. Is it?
It is. It is. So I've been on the board of the Library Foundation for 5 years. I'm heading into the final year of my last term. I can't tell you how much of an education it has been for me to learn about our library system. I think the most recent data I saw, something like 75% or 80% of Torontonians have a library card. That's astounding. It's fantastic. And to be involved with the library during the pandemic, like library systems across Canada and around the world, libraries, they pivoted, they responded to meet the needs in the communities. And I'm a big ambassador and fan of libraries, but the Toronto Library in particular.
Oh, fantastic. Well, again, thanks for sharing that tidbit. So So let's roll up the sleeves and get started here with this conversation, because I think there's a lot of really good insights that you can provide to our listenership today. The philanthropy can be a very broad term. It can be, something that a lot of people are not super familiar with, but to have the expertise that you have, my job today is to try to pull out some of the nuggets, what you've learned, what you've seen, how people do things well, maybe sometimes how they don't do things quite as well as maybe they should. So that's really kind of the objective of today's discussion. So first question is, so why does someone or family member or family hire a philanthropic advisor? Like, what problems do you help people solve?
Mhm. Well, so sometimes it's a problem or a range of problems or challenges that a family needs some support with. Other times it's just people who are starting, right? And they want to get started off on the right foot so that they can prevent problems down the line. I would say the biggest thread, the most consistent thread that runs through most of my work is that the clients are going through some type of change. So in the case of families, for example, it could be, they've sold a business, or family members are exiting the operational side of the business, or there's a succession plan actively underway, or someone has died, someone is married, grandkids are born. Um, those are the types of changes where philanthropy tends to rise to the surface in a new way. And that's true for families who have been giving for a long time. I work with some families that they're in their fourth and fifth generations in their family foundations. It's just as true for them as with families who are just getting started, right?
Yeah.
So typically there are four areas that a philanthropic advisor will help. And these are the areas where, again, families either are having issues or they want to get right as they get started. And the first one is around purposes, getting clear. Why are we doing this? What do we want to do? What difference do we want to make in the world? What's our mission going to be? What values will guide this work? The second area is mapping the relationships. Who's going to be involved? And in what ways and what criteria might we need to build around that? In some family, if it's a small nuclear family, that can be quite evident. For larger, more complex families, sometimes there are not as many seats around a board table, for example, of a foundation, as there are members who may want to participate. So how do you approach that while still honoring the desire family members may have? But there are also relationships outside the family, right? So your charitable partners, content experts in the areas that are of interest to you. And some families often will appreciate the value of having a non-family member, for example, on their board of directors. So helping families map out those relationships. The third area is organization. How do we organize this to get it off the ground? What structures are we going to use? What governance? And how are we going to resource it? And then the fourth area is around implementation. Actually getting donations out the door into the community in a credible way, finding those really great opportunities, doing due diligence and research and evaluation. So those four clusters are often where families have challenges and where some external help can be really useful, so that they can give well and they can give in a credible way that really makes a difference.
Excellent. So what was your path to working in this space? Like, why did you get into this field? So maybe share a little bit of your background story.
My first job was as a fundraiser. I actually spent 20 years as a professional fundraiser here in Canada, worked with some fabulous organizations that are making a big impact both here in Canada and outside of Canada. And then 10 years ago started Watermark. I think for me, and we all, I think we all strive for this in our life. We want to live lives of purpose, purpose and meaning. And for me, philanthropy has been that platform. It's been a space where, I can give the best of what I got, right? My inclinations, the things that get me excited. Philanthropy has been such a great platform for me to express who I am and what I care about, and to help others. Because that's what a purposeful life is, right? Is how we're able to help others. And then I grew up in a home with parents who lived lives of service, and they were givers, they were helpers, and my experience is not unlike most people's experience who are involved with philanthropy. I ask generous people all the time, where does that come from? What motivates you? What has inspired you to give back, to help? And more often than not, it's linked back to very early experiences in their lives, either parents or grandparents or other special people in their lives that modeled generosity, right? Even in the absence of wealth, that whatever they had, they gave, or they volunteered, or they were active. And so I often get questions from families, how young should we get kids involved? How young is too young? How old is too old? And my answer typically is the younger the better, because whatever you're doing, either proactively or just modeling, they're watching, right? And those seeds get planted pretty deeply. So I've experienced that in my life, and I'm grateful for that. But I've spent my career in the philanthropy space, the giving space, and it's been a great journey so far. And I'm still young.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but where did you grow up? Where were you born?
So I was born here in Canada, but I spent a number of my formative years in Barbados, in the Caribbean. And so I often say, I'm a proud Canadian and a citizen, but my heart's home is in the Caribbean. And I've continued to spend a lot of time there, as much as I can get down there. And do work in the region, also with generous people and with charities doing important work.
Excellent, thank you. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing or observing today here in Canada and globally, from a point of view of philanthropy? Like how is the industry or the sector shifting, and where do you see it growing more and more towards, let's say, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Mm-hmm. So I would say here, particularly here in Canada, but in other parts of the world who may even be a bit more ahead than in Canada, I think the rise of family philanthropy is an important trend, certainly for generous families, but also the network and the ecosystem of advisors to families of wealth. I think there's an increasing awareness among families that they need to be responsible stewards of their wealth. And they see philanthropy as an avenue for lots of good things in the community, but also for their family, right? And so I think that is a critical trend. And in my work with charities and nonprofits, I think the more that they can grow their capacity to work with families, work across generations with their donors, I think that will position them well, because that's a relevant trend. Secondly, and this is global, and I think it'll resonate with you when I say it, but a greater focus on issues of justice, right? So social justice, economic justice, racial justice, climate justice. I think there's so much happening in that space. And when it comes to philanthropy and how philanthropists are showing up and where they're directing their charitable donations, how they are partnering with their charitable partners, there's a lot of discussion around that, and there's a need for greater justice, and certainly for philanthropists who um, want to make systemic change, right? So you can address symptoms of issues, or you can get to the root of issues. So I think the lens of justice is one that is very much on the radar of both major philanthropies globally, but also individual philanthropists. And then the third trend, and some of this is being driven by generational change, is I think just a broader lens of what it means to do good, right? So not just traditional philanthropy or donations that are eligible for a charitable tax receipt, right?
Yep.
So younger generations, for example, and we know this, I observe it in the families that I work with, but we also have good research and data on this. Younger people have a broader view of even what their community is, right? They define community differently. They are engaged in philanthropy and traditional grant making, but they're also super interested in social finance, responsible investing, ethical consumerism, various forms of activism. It's not popular to talk about crypto these days. It hasn't been doing well, but the rise of crypto giving internationally has been driven by young people. So I think this broader lens, that we need all the tools that are available to us to do good. And philanthropy is an important part of that, but it's not the only game in town. So I think those three themes are prominent among others.
Excellent. So some donors, I mean, our practice, we deal with, typically families that have net worths of 25 million up to, a couple billion in size. And we see all different types of giving patterns, giving rationale or motives. So it's quite fascinating to see. So some donors love the public recognition of making, big donations or gifts to hospitals or different causes, while others prefer to give quietly or anonymously or discreetly. So what factors influence these choices, in your opinion, and what difference does it make?
Yeah, there's so many dimensions to your question. Some of it is personality, right? Some people are just more private by nature. Religion and faith play a role in some of those decisions. In some faith traditions, if you get a lot of praise or glory for your giving, it takes away some of the spiritual benefit of being generous. My advice to clients really is to look at a case-by-case basis, right? And to have really candid conversations with your charitable partners, because they may have objectives for particular gifts as well. We have some wonderful examples in Canada of people from non-white, non-traditional donor communities who've made some really substantial and significant investments in community. Being able to profile those gifts and name those gifts is quite profound, and it's important. And broadly speaking, I think it's important for all of us in community to see all the generosity around us, right? When we see it, we better understand how giving and philanthropy and generosity makes us better, makes our communities stronger, healthier, and so forth. So there's a lot of value in seeing, and sometimes naming a gift, being the face of a gift, can also highlight a particular issue that may not get the attention that it needs otherwise. It could help attract additional funds to that particular cause or the organization. I think the flip side of that is a lot of people are increasingly private. And I have found that in my work with clients, just not wanting to be on the radar. We live in very complex times. And when you put your name out there attached to anything, you're opening yourself up to scrutiny. And there's some families that are quite used to living in the public eye, and those who are not. And so I think we have to honor that. I was a fundraiser for 20 years, and the ethical commitments that fundraisers make is to honor the wishes of donors in that regard. And so I think being able to have those candid conversations with your charitable partners, and to make a decision for each gift, to really think about, what do we want to accomplish? What do our charitable partners want to accomplish? Can really help you get to the right answer.
So as far as that goes, do you also see more and more people moving towards donor advised foundations or structures because of the potential for anonymity or discretion in that sense?
Yeah, so donor advised funds, they are the fastest growing charitable vehicle in Canada. The assets held in donor advised funds have doubled in the last few years, and expected to increase 10% year over year. And privacy is one of the drivers. One of the big drivers is that they're just really much more available now. A lot of financial institutions, wealth management firms have gotten into the space of providing donor advised funds, which in Canada were traditionally only available at community foundations. So they're more available, but they are also the only vehicle where you can truly have privacy. Private foundations are not private at all, right? Any gifts made, any disbursements have to be reported publicly. And so for some families, that is a consideration. And, there are some families, they will have a private foundation and they will also have a donor advised fund. And sometimes that could be for particular kinds of charitable donations that they want to keep private for whatever reasons, or it could be as a mechanism for a particular strategy, giving strategy that is distinct from the one that they want to hold within their private foundation. Some families will also open a donor advised fund for younger family members, as a way to get them started in their own discipline of charitable giving, and that experience of making recommendations every year as a companion to what they may do with a private foundation. So sometimes it's one or the other, and sometimes it could be both. But privacy, I think, is an increasing issue in the charitable sector. But I think that's a spillover from what's happening in the broader society, and I think we all have to reflect on that, and what that means about us and what it means for giving in the future.
Yeah, our group has worked very closely with an organization I know you're familiar with too, is Charitable Impact Foundation, which is where donors can set up donor advised funds online within a couple of minutes. And it's pretty fascinating to see how families that end up engaging the extension of their families, it creates an interesting different set of questions, right? Or conversations, I would say. So it's pretty fun to see how families kind of develop and grow in this space. And quite candidly, I find, and I know you would find the same thing, it's just it leads to a better understanding of their values and kind of what really motivates them. And it's kind of fun to see that in different groups. And everybody's different, right? It's not a one size fit all in ways, right? Okay, let's take a quick break there from our interview with Dr. Sharilyn Hale of the Watermark Philanthropic Council. We'll be back here shortly. Want to know how Canada's top industry leaders feel about creating significant wealth in the world around them? Find out with me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at Canaccord Genuity, and host of the new Smart Wealth podcast, available on iHeart or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe now. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're here with Dr. Sharilyn Hale, discussing philanthropic trends and insights from one of Canada's top experts in the space. So welcome back. We're going to jump right back into some questions here with Sharilyn. So, zero doubt in my mind that you create tremendous value in the advice that you provide to the families and entrepreneurs and groups that you work with. So, in general, how does a top philanthropic advisor like yourself compensated? How does a family engage with you? Just to get into the more the nuts and bolts of this, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. How do I get paid? Is that the?
Pretty much.
Yes, well, I do get paid. It's not volunteer. But in truth, don't tell my clients this, but I would probably do it for free if I could afford to. um, yeah, so I'm very transparent with clients about that. It kind of depends on the nature of the engagement. Every engagement is different. Some are very focused, very defined, short and sweet, and so that could be an hourly, based on an hourly rate or a day rate. Other engagements are deeper. They're longer, so that could be a retainer basis. But again, I'm very transparent with clients about that, and the compensation is also always linked to specific deliverables or outcomes, so that they have a sense of where we're going and where they'll end up at the end. I think more important for me to clarify is that my compensation is not linked to the amount of charitable assets that they have or a commission on the gifts that they may make. And my fees are never paid by charities, always the clients directly.
Excellent. Yeah, so you're very independent in your ability to kind of assess scenarios, but you've also had a very interesting background, right? Being on the fundraising side for 20 years, you've been able to kind of see best practices and see a lot of scenarios as to how the industry and sector works. So I guess here's an interesting question for you: is privacy. Like I've been part of 15 nonprofit organizations myself over the years, and whenever an organization is doing a fundraising campaign or whatnot, I mean, maybe just take us through how a well-organized campaign normally structures or strategizes around raising. Let's say the target is 25 million. I'm just picking a number out of the hat here. Like, how does the organization kind of brainstorm of the foundation to go about raising that money? And as far as what are some of the best practices as to how they keep information private?
Okay.
A loaded one.
Sorry?
A loaded one.
Loaded. Yeah. Well, and two very different. So I'll start with the privacy one first, because that's a little more straightforward. So every organization, credible organization, should have a privacy policy about how information is managed, shared, destroyed. There are guidelines around that, including as related to fundraising. And I think it's a reasonable question for a donor even to ask a fundraiser, a chief philanthropy officer, whoever they're dealing with, what is their approach to maintaining privacy and confidentiality. What's this? Loose lips sinks ships, right? I think discretion in fundraising is a really important quality. As fundraisers, we're only as good as our ethics and our reputation, and that leads to trust and confidence in the organizations that we represent and that we work for. So there are guidelines, policy. Certainly the sharing of donor information is one that would be done on a selected basis. And if it's, both for internal purposes, but also if you're engaging volunteers, for example, in the fundraising process, they should be signing a confidentiality agreement relative to the information that's shared with them, using it only for the purposes that it's been shared with. But it's an ongoing thing, and the bigger the campaign and the more external volunteers that are engaged, the more people that touch information, the more attention has to be paid to maintaining that, because you don't want to damage relationships, and you want people to feel comfortable about engaging with you. So that's on the privacy side. On the campaign planning side, there is good methodology for how to do a major campaign, a major gift campaign. It's tried and true because it works, it evolves as we go, but there are some fundamentals to doing that. And one of them is what we call a planning study or feasibility study. And typically organizations will engage some outside counsel to support the organization with this step, but it's really to test your new project, initiative, capital development, whatever it is you're raising funds for. You want to test it among those who are already good supporters of your organization, as well as people who could be prospective supporters, right? So you're kind of putting it out there. You want to get their feedback. There could be ways that community feedback can make the project better, or can help the organization communicate it better in a more persuasive way. And so getting that feedback is critically important. But typically what often happens or should happen in those conversations is also to get a sense of if this person was to potentially support this project, what range of gift might they consider? Okay, so it's not we're asking you for a gift today. It's just kind of feeling out, assessing appetite, and the responses to those questions. And I suspect your listeners, many of them have participated in those types of interviews, so they'll know what I'm talking about. But that feedback from the community of supporters and potential supporters is absolutely essential as organizations assess what is feasible for us to raise for a particular project. So usually what comes back is some gap between what we can likely raise among who we know and our initial base of prospective supporters versus what we need to raise. And then we have to go kind of to the next level. Who are the other people in the community that we might want to speak with, get them engaged in the organization so that they too might be open to this opportunity. Volunteers are critically important in fundraising campaigns, whether it's for $5 million or $500 million. Volunteers are really the drivers. And it's that volunteer network. Sometimes they're called a campaign cabinet or a fundraising committee or whatever the name is. But those are the people who carry the responsibility to bring the community in to support. And in that process, of course, there's some sharing of information so that they can make a credible approach to someone who's been identified to start building that relationship. I have both led campaigns, I've consulted on campaigns. The use of that information should always be done in a very respectful manner. It's not shared all over the place and gossipy this and that. And that really comes down to culture in an organization and values of the organization and how much they value philanthropy, how much they value donors. And those are things that I think philanthropists should be keeping an eye on so that they can make good giving decisions.
Excellent. So, Canadians today, I think, having spent 8 years of my life in the US, university, and then for work, coming back to Canada recently, I find, Canadians naturally think a little bit more international or global. In the wealth management industry, Canada's 3.5–4% of the global markets. So we're kind of small, so we naturally think bigger and more global, I should say. Having lived in the US, American culture, from what I've seen when it comes to investing, is much more US focused, which you suspect, right? Roughly 50% of the markets are US equities or fixed income. So as this applies to philanthropy, I would say that there's a lot of Canadians that often have global links and connections. So are they actually giving internationally today in your eyes? Are you seeing more of a push there, or are you seeing them to stay more localized in Canada in their approach?
Yeah. So part of the answer is it varies for everyone, right? There are a lot of philanthropists. They're very focused on their own community. We call that place-based philanthropy. Um, Others have a national focus or mandate in their giving, and others incorporate international. I think when it comes to philanthropy in Canada, it's kind of a reflection of who we are as a country, right? We have lots of people here with heritage and connections and business and academic ties and family and marriages, right, from other parts of the world. And so, we tend to give to what we care about, and being able to give in other parts of the world is really important. I have clients who, they are deeply committed to other parts of the world, and sometimes not because of a personal connection, but because they've been really moved or compelled because of a particular need, right? In the Canadian context, you can give anywhere in the world, but if you want a charitable tax receipt, or if you're giving through your foundation, there are regulatory hurdles to giving outside the country. It's not impossible. There are mechanisms to be able to do that. And there is some work underway to look at the regulatory environment that will free up Canadians to give more generously abroad. I find it very interesting in my work in the Caribbean, for example, where there's Canadians that give in the Caribbean. There's also people from the Caribbean who give to Canada and the US and the UK and to other parts of the world because they're global citizens, right? And I think the more we can break down some of those barriers, so that generosity can flow to where there's need. I think that's really important. There's a lot of similarities among philanthropists globally. They all care about impact. They all want to make a difference. And so I think being able to engage people and support them to give where they want to give is really important.
Excellent. So how would you suggest a family or an entrepreneur is going through a life change or a liquidity event, or maybe a thinking change? Maybe they're feeling like they're evolving to what they want to do with their wealth. How would you say is the best way to select a philanthropic advisor? From a professionalism point of view, content expertise, methodology, background. So how would you answer that question, Sharilyn?
Yeah. I think it's a really important question because anyone can say they're a philanthropy advisor, right? And so if you don't know, or you don't know what you don't know, right, you may not get what you think you're getting. So when I think of getting good philanthropic advice, I start by recognizing there are two components to that. The first side of that I call the technical side, right? So that's your tax, estate planning, insurance, use of insurance vehicles, the legal framework, regulatory considerations. Those are really important, and you need to get good advice in those areas. They are also areas where professionals have professional designations. They're regulated professions, and so you need to seek those out, right? The second component is what I call the content side of philanthropy. So these are the four areas that I referenced earlier. So getting clear about purposes, mapping out the relationships, how's that going to work, who we're going to engage, the organizational components, and then the implementation. So the content side needs to speak to the technical side. But any technical counsel that I might offer on the content side, I am ethically required to say. However, I am not a professional in that area, and I encourage you to seek independent professional advice. Right. So there are some. Sorry.
So accounting, legal, tax related.
Yeah. Now, a good advisor, philanthropy advisor, should be conversant in those areas and should be able to work well with those other advisors. But that clear scope of work is really, really important. And there may be philanthropy advisors who do have professional designations in one or more of those other areas. So understanding what you need and what you're being offered is incredibly important. From there, so you need a philanthropy advisor. I mean, you touched on it. You want someone who has some experience, some content knowledge, not just theoretical knowledge, but even, some connection to the community, right? There's the science, and then there's the art of giving. How close are they to the community? Do they really understand how charities work? Can they give you good advice on that front? The second area is professional development. Have they invested in their own learning in the space? Do they hold the credentials that are available in the philanthropy area? Have they continued to invest in their learning and in their networking so that they can bring the latest and greatest? And the whole purpose of education is to know better, understand more deeply. And so someone who's made those commitments can really bring more value to the table. And then the third area is methodology. How are you, philanthropy advisor, going to help us as a family figure this out? What approach do you use? What kinds of tools do you use? Any advisor, whatever the discipline, if they can't explain to you their methodology for how they will engage you to take you on the journey and where you expect to be at the end of that process, they may not be bringing the level of skill that will really help. And then lastly, I would say, even within the philanthropic advising community, it's a pretty small community. There's not a lot of us. But among us, we all kind of have our own areas of particular interest, right? And areas where we do deeper dives. So I think just having good conversation and probing that and doing a bit of research will help families land with someone who can really provide value. Getting clear helps individuals, couples, families. I was speaking with someone last week, and he said, Sharilyn, my wife and I, when we became clear, he said, I now get goosebumps from my giving, and I feel a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. It's been hanging around our necks for years. And now we feel better. We feel better, and we enjoy our giving even more. So, and that's the goal. That's the goal, to give well and to give in a meaningful way.
Well said. Very well said on that. On that note, we'll take a quick break from our interview with Dr. Sharilyn Hale of Watermark Philanthropic Council, and we'll be right back shortly. Thank you. Want to know how Canada's top industry leaders feel about creating significant wealth in the world around them? Find out with me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at Canaccord Genuity, and host of the new Smart Wealth podcast, available on iHeart or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe now. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Thane Stenner. I'm interviewing Dr. Sharilyn Hale of Watermark Philanthropic Council. We're here today talking or discussing topics of philanthropy, charity, community involvement, from one of the top experts here in Canada. So Sharilyn, let's get back into some more questions. So philanthropy and social impact is one of the 10 domains of the family wealth aspect. So, when it comes to the Ultra High Net Worth Institute that you're part of, you're a faculty member there, maybe speak to the point around need for integration.
Yeah, so the Ultra High Net Worth Institute is a relatively new entity. It's intended to be a think tank, a resource for all those who work in the family wealth space. And they've mapped a domain, a model of 10 domains of all the different disciplines that come into play for families of wealth, and typically where there are advisory functions. I was really excited to see that philanthropy and social impact was its own domain, but to visually see it in the model was really useful too, because there are ways that philanthropy touches on the other areas, such as investment management, such as family governance and generational succession, right? So I think that's another consideration for families as they look at advisors. Does this person understand the full scope of our life? We don't need to know all the detail, but to understand the various moving pieces and to be able to work collaboratively with the other advisors, other disciplines, so that things aren't standing in isolation. And I think particularly in the case of philanthropy, it just cuts across so many other aspects of family and family life, certainly for complex families, business families. And it's there as a place to bring family together, to accomplish family goals, to connect them to the community. There's so much valuable aspects to the philanthropy domain, but not in isolation.
Yeah, and maybe another way of putting that is it's not just about the financial charitable aspects or philanthropic aspects. It's also about the emotional and the connections and the gelling of the family and making some of these having these discussions and having this more as a family purpose, I think is a pretty powerful thing that can evolve quite nicely. So new regulatory tax changes in Canada, which is increasing the disbursement quota. Maybe speak to that and the timing of that.
Yeah, so up until January, so for the last number of years, if you had a foundation, you were required to spend a minimum of 3.5% of the assets on an annual basis on your charitable activities. There are some foundations, they don't even have to worry about their disbursement quota. They give way more than that. Sadly, there are a lot of foundations that struggle to get to 3.5%. So that's a problem. The government has just made a change that takes effect as of January, actually increasing the disbursement quota to 5% of charitable assets on an annual basis. So I suspect there'll be a lot of foundations that will kind of be caught up in realizing, gee, we really need to get our house in order. If they've been struggling to get to 3.5, to really get up to 5% and to do it in a credible way. I think the push to 5, and just for context, in the US, it has been 5 for many years, and there was a campaign to actually push it up to 10%, which has not been successful, but there was a concerted effort by many stakeholder groups in Canada to get it at least to 5%, really in response to needs in the community, right? That for foundations in particular, the funders of those foundations got immediate tax relief. And yet the funds are sitting there. It's more nuanced than that. But so getting it to 5% was a very proactive campaign, and it's one that we're seeing in other parts of the world, right? A broader criticism of philanthropy sitting on money as opposed to getting it out into the community. Foundations in Canada hold $9 billion in assets. Sorry, 90 billion in assets. So there's a lot of money at play, and 5%. Yeah.
Yeah, that can add up. So research helps to inform, what we know about the sector, what we do, and how we do it. So, your doctoral research is the only research in Canada on governance and family philanthropy today, and it distills down into a roadmap to help families give in a way that really works. So maybe just speak to that research, like why you did it, when you released it, and what you're hoping comes from it.
Yeah. So I finished it just before the pandemic, thank goodness, because I don't think I could have juggled everything. I think everyone had their challenges during the pandemic to juggle everything in their life. That it was a wonderful learning experience for me doing a doctorate. It was both a personal goal and a professional goal. But I was doing my research at the same time as I was growing my business. And so there was a really beautiful connection or loop, right, between the theoretical stuff that I was learning and what I was actually seeing and doing in practice. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about learning, right, is when you can merge those things. In the academic world, I'm viewed as a pracademic. So I'm not fully an academic because I'm also a practitioner, and I'm quite happy sitting in that space. I think it's a useful place to be. So there's very little research in Canada about philanthropy at all. So to contribute something was important to me. The particular area of my focus was looking at families that do not use a corporate giving structure like a foundation for their giving, because I wanted to look at how did they organize themselves? How did they govern themselves when they didn't have to do anything, right? So with a private foundation, you are incorporated, you must have a board, you have officers, there are certain things that you have to do. And so the result of my research was actually a model for governance that's kind of agnostic to structure, which at the time I didn't realize how kind of interesting that is. But given the growth in donor advised funds, given the growth in families using multiple structures, I work with clients, they have multiple structures in different jurisdictions around the world. How do you craft an approach to governance and family governance relative to philanthropy in that context? And traditional governance doesn't have a good answer, right? So the model is really based on four components: governance actions. What do families actually do? Generous families to get organized. What are the principles of engagement that they use to do those actions? Governance enablers. What are the things that they need in order to do that? And then differentiators. What are the factors that inform their decisions in each of the other areas? So for me, it was just a really useful way to kind of organize what I was seeing in the world around me, and mapping it out in a way that may help others, may make sense to others, and other families in particular.
Fantastic. Well, kudos to you for taking on that endeavor in a very worthwhile sector. So we're down to the last question, Sharilyn. This is always the fun question. If you wanted to finish this interview with 2 or 3 insights or suggestions or ideas to inspire people, to think more philanthropically, do more philanthropically, become more involved philanthropically, what would be those 2 or 3 final inspirational notes?
No pressure at all, Thane.
Um,
um, there's a lovely poem statement from Mr. Rogers that he wrote, and I can't recite the whole thing, but there's the end of it. None of us are extra, right? We're here for a reason. And I think that it's been such a guiding driver for me, but I also see it in the clients that I work with. And so if it's a challenge to your listeners, right? You're not extra, right? You're here for a reason. You're here for a purpose. Have a look around you, see what you have to be able to share and to give, and then kind of get to it. It feels good. It feels good. So that's one. I think another one that sometimes comes up in my conversations with families in particular is there's no one way. There's not one right way that families have to structure their giving, approach their giving. And sometimes when people think of family philanthropy, they think, okay, everyone has to come to the table. We all have to pick priorities and agree to them. And then we all have to review and make decisions based on consensus. And that's the only way, right? That's only one model. There are lots of ways that families can structure their giving in a way that works for them as a family. Every family is different. One of the findings from my research was the role of social capital within families, right? The degree that they share values, behaviors, and insights, ways of looking at the world and understanding the world, right? And some families have greater social capital, and they may be used to coming together, having family meetings. Maybe they have a vibrant structure related to business. They're kind of used to that. And then there are other families who may have less social capital, right? And they're not used to working in that way. I've worked with families, they've never had a family meeting, right? They've never done anything together or collectively, right? So even coming together to have a meeting, they weren't accustomed to being in a meeting, right? So there's a whole continuum. What's most important is if you want to give, come up with a plan or a strategy that suits, that reflects who you are as an individual or as a family, and what you want to accomplish. There's so much need out there. There's so much opportunity. There's some great resources and good advice, so that you can really kind of get going and make a difference. And any philanthropist that I have worked with, talked to, and I've spoken with thousands literally over the years, right? Their philanthropy, their commitment to the community, their volunteerism, it enriches their lives in ways that they had never anticipated, often more than their professional pursuits, and is such a beautiful legacy to share with a community. It's not just about if you have kids, but if you also have a family, a beautiful legacy for them. So those are my 2 pieces of advice. Just get out there. It feels good.
Well, thanks, Sharilyn, so much for sharing your insights and your time today. And I'm sure the listeners will really appreciate just your thinking on this very important topic here in Canada and globally. So thank you sincerely for your time today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So everybody, that was Dr. Sharilyn Hale of the Watermark Philanthropic Council group based in Toronto. So we're very blessed to have been able to have interviewed her today. And for all of you who have been getting used to downloading the Smart Wealth podcasts produced by the BNN Bloomberg brand studio team each month. I hope you listen in, enjoy this particular interview as I did. And on our next Smart Wealth podcast next month, we'll have Duncan McPherson, who's the CEO and founder of Pareto Systems, who's an author, coach, and well-known speaker in the space of performance coaching for financial advisors and their teams. So that'll be a really insightful interview, given the fact that he coaches some of the very best teams in North America. So tune in for that one. You won't be disappointed. Bye-bye for now.
The comments expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. And should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF.